You're listening to the Good Question Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Our goal is to make each of our guests exclaim, that's a good question. I don't know the answer. Because when that happens, it means you, the listener, may be inspired to learn more beyond the interview and to ask great questions yourself that lead to new insights. In this podcast, we cover historical and current anthropology, comparative religion, and history. Welcome, and let's get started.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Good Question Podcast. My guest today is Mitch McGinley. He's a business broker. We will talk about how to plan your exit so you can retire confidently without losing control. Mitch also is big into fitness. He works with health and wellness owners that they want an honest evaluation and experience of what they're doing and helping their studios grow and cash out. He's helped over 60 studios do that, driving more than $10 million in deals last year alone. So, Mitch, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm so excited to be here.
So tell me a bit about your background and your work today as a business broker. It doesn't seem like, no offense, but like a very prestigious profession that people are dying to get into. But what do I know? Just asking.
I would say that is true. My impression of business brokers since I got into this world was that it was really easy to stand out by providing good customer service and being honest with people, which is a pretty low bar, I think.
Yeah, and not always. So what was your opinion of being of business brokers before you became one?
Well, how I got to this is really weird. So real quick, coming out of college, I worked in restaurants, food and beverage. I opened a restaurant. Then I moved to San Diego. I wanted to switch to hotels. And so I got my foot in the door with Omni Hotels. And I spent 7 years working my way up the hotel. And by the end of it, I was working in finance. I was working on my MBA at night. And I realized that I didn't want to be a manager ever again. I wanted to be an owner. And so I went and worked with this guy who had a startup where he was flipping boutique hotels in San Diego. And so I was running hotels and he was teaching me the transactional side of it. And that was really fun and cool. And we did really well, but it was killing me. And I was recently married and we wanted to start a family. And right at that time, my wife and I got offered the opportunity to buy our favorite yoga studio. It wasn't something that we had really ever considered, but it was something we knew we wanted to own a yoga studio together. It's something we'd always been into. And so we did, just took this huge leap of faith, left equity in hotels so that, we could wear flip-flops and drive a golf cart across our little beach town in San Diego, and raise our kids there. And we did. And it was awesome. And we did really well with that studio. We ended up selling it for 5 times what we bought it for about 6 years later.
Nice.
Somewhere along the way, I had gotten kind of bored and a friend got me connected to MindBody, which is the software platform that most of these businesses used over the last 20 years. And they started paying me to speak at their education events. So, teaching business owners who got into a business because of a passion that they have, not because they love business, helping them be better business people. And so I got this reputation of traveling around and speaking and helping all these small business owners become better business people. And then when we sold our studio, I did it myself. I felt comfortable doing it based on, the couple of deals that I had done. And then my friends started asking me for help selling theirs. And so it all came together in a really organic way because a local business brokerage reached out to me, asked me if I wanted to sell my studio. I laughed. I was like, I'm literally closing on it next week. And we had a long conversation and they were like, you should come work with us. And so it wasn't anything that I had ever really thought about, but I went and interviewed and the guys who I interviewed with are now my best friends in San Diego. Wonderful people who have really great life-work balance, young kids. Our kids were all the same age, lots of integrity, work really hard, but also enjoy life. And so I spent, most of the last 5 years working with them. And then
That's really cool.
Yeah, I decided to focus exclusively on boutique fitness because it's what I know the best. And so, that includes gyms, yoga, Pilates, spas, recovery methods, neighborhood health, like med spas fall under this category. And so there's a lot of interesting different types of businesses that are really helping people, and being a part of keeping those communities alive is really rewarding.
Are you familiar with Alex Hormozy? It was like a Yeah, I figured you would be.
I mean, what a following he has.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. I would think that a lot of these gyms, let me back up a little. So 10 years ago, I was looking at, possibly buying a business, and I got to the point where, I submitted a bunch of the MDAs, and then I looked at financials and stuff, and I wasn't like great at looking at financials, but it looked to me like a lot of businesses were on death's door, very close to missing a payroll. I mean, they were barely, the owner would like take loans against, instead of taking compensation, they would take loans, they would call it that, so they had to pay that back. And you look and there really was no income after like the seller's discretionary earnings, the stuff they took out, as the owner. What do you see when you look at businesses? I mean, I'm sure you've seen hundreds and hundreds of sheets of financials and everything, but anything in common?
They're all over the place. And I've seen plenty of those that are on death's door. Obviously, I started this business right before COVID. And so my name got out there really quickly, and I was doing everything that I could to help everyone that I could. And it was really frustrating, difficult time. Selling businesses that aren't making money is virtually impossible. I've been fortunate in the last couple of years to have grown my pipeline in a way that I can now be pretty picky about what I choose to take on. And so, the listings that I choose to take on now are all, polished owners who have clean financials and are not the ones running the business day to day. They've got management in place and systems in place and, the opportunity to scale. And those are the people who are really able to sell, pretty easily. And so if you get to the point where you're doing $1 million in EBITDA, being able to sell your business should be fairly easy. But there's a staggering statistic that only 20% of businesses that get listed for sale actually sell. And that's crazy. I mean, that's of the ones that get listed. I'm really happy to share that in the last 2 years, there's only one that I listed that I wasn't able to sell, and we're still working on it. And she's one of my best friends now. So, there's definitely like a recipe for this that people just don't know. It's not generally taught. I mean, I went through an MBA program and learned virtually nothing about this.
So remember, M&A was, well, yes, I would think that an M&A module you go for an MBA, but was it just like huge corporate merger type stuff and not the meat and potatoes of buying businesses?
Totally. There's too much to cover, in the whole market. And so people are always way more interested in M&A when we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars and, or billions, whatever, companies that people know the names of. But what I've learned for the last 5 or 6 years, the majority of the businesses in this country are small businesses run by individuals, and there's so many baby boomers retiring who have phenomenal businesses that chances are they've got, a great business with a terrible website and no marketing. And, there's a lot of opportunity for someone younger to come in and buy a really stable, great business from someone retiring and add a bunch of value to it. And I want people to do that. I want people to invest in themselves instead of, working a corporate job that's high risk.
Well, what are the reasons that people would sell? I mean, if someone has a successful business and they have a manager in place, they don't have to do much. Like, why would they ever sell? Seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's usually part of a bigger life transition. A lot of owners are not capable of being hands off, and so when they pour their heart into something for 4 or 5 years, they're burned out and they feel like they've taken it as far as they can, and they're ready to move on to their next project. And truthfully, that's, I think, a smart approach. I mean, just like everything, you're best off to buy low and sell high. So selling before you get burned out or before you step away from the business and the manager, kind of drops the ball a little bit, sales might fall off and payroll goes up a little bit. Like, all those are fine lines, but ultimately people need to sell businesses all the time. And I'd say the number 1 and 2 reason is something having to do with either their children or their parent.
Gotcha. In terms of small business though, $1 million in EBITDA is a lot. And just there are people listening, EBITDA, if I get this right, is earnings before interest, taxes, deduction, and amortization. So before the financing people have in place to, what debts they owe on the business and what taxes they have to pay. It's kind of, I guess, a way of, as fairly as possible estimating what the business can really do.
Yeah, I mean, in a simple language, I would call it the earnings. It's largely the profit from the business. And it's usually just a multiple of that number. And depending on the industry, most
So let's say, your profit margin is 10 to 20% if you're really healthy. That means a $5 to $10 million business top line. That's pretty big. I would think a lot of businesses that try to sell are below $1 million in EBITDA, maybe from 200,000 to 500,000. I would think that's a lot.
Absolutely. And those tend to trade at like a 3x multiple. And that's what SBA loans are out there for. is so that people can buy these businesses with 10% down. So let's use your example. Let's say it's a $500,000 business. At a 3x multiple, that's a $1.5 million purchase. To buy that business, you have to put 10% down. So you'd have to put $150,000 down, and then the bank would lend the rest so long as the business checks out. And so you could, a business that's making $500 a year after the debt service from that loan is going to make $250. It's just like a rough rule of thumb, like 50%'s a good conservative estimate. It goes from making $500 to $250, but now you've taken $150,000, invested it in a company where you're going to get that $150K back in about 8 months. And then you've got a business that's making $250,000 a year in cash flow while you're building the other half of that in equity in the business. So that you go to sell it, you can, hopefully you improve it, you add value to the business, maybe you sell it for 3 instead of 1.5. Well, now you pay off half of the loan that's left over, and you've made yourself $1.5 million in 5 years or something like that on a $150,000 investment and betting on yourself.
I also see it as I know this makes sense, but buying years of work that you don't have to work. Like you said, the yoga studio y'all bought, you lived off the income, I'm sure, for a while. Then you sell it, you get, essentially almost another 5-6 years of income without having to work anymore in that business.
Yeah, it's probably closer to 2 or 3 years, 5 or 6, but yes. And so that's the fun, the serial entrepreneurs who are out there, they have a 5-year project and they do well with it and they make some money, and then they take a chunk of the money that they make and invest it in something else, and they do a different project. And if there's a year or two off in between, no problem.
Do you hear from the people that you help to buy businesses and you help to sell businesses, hey Mitch, and now I'm on to my next thing, I want your help again? Or is it usually, one and done and who knows where they go?
No, it's the best feeling in the world when I hear from someone that I've worked with before. And I've had several buyers who have become sellers. And so that's a really wonderful compliment. I had sellers who have sold multiple businesses. And then I also have a lot of sellers who come to hang out with me at some point. Part of what I love to share with people is, once you've sold your business and you're free of the brick and mortar and the HR headaches and the employees and, having to be responsible to be somewhere at a specific time, you're free. And I wasn't quite prepared for this, but, as a business broker, like I can work from anywhere. All I need is my phone and my computer. And so we actually just moved to Spain.
Oh, wow.
We wanted to do 6 months abroad as a family. My kids are 12 and 9. And now we don't own that brick and mortar business anymore. And I'm able to work remotely. All of a sudden it was like, oh my God, we could live anywhere. And so, been to 9 different countries this year. Like, it's really, really fun to be proud of what you've accomplished, to cash out, to not have any more risk there, and to move on to your next project.
That's great. What are, I'm sure there's a lot of misconceptions people have about, working with a business broker, buying and selling. What are some of the ones that you hear all the time?
The number one is why would I give up 10% to a broker? That's the number one thing I hear. And the very simple answer to that is that it's a false premise. When people work with us, they walk away with more money because we're able to leverage multiple offers, get lots of people at the table, get those offers up, give the seller the ability to choose the offer and the buyer that they want, and then walk away with more money, and we handle the whole process. So that's number one. Number two.
Do you ever ask people after, purchase or sale, was it worth it? After sale, was the 10% worth it? You ever ask your clients that, and what do they tell you?
Oh, I never have to, because they tell me without me asking. It takes a long time to sell a business. It's usually, I'd say on average, 6 to 9 months from the time that you hit go. And so a lot of these people I've been working with for a couple of years. It's someone who came to me at the beginning of 2024, and I said, you're not quite ready. You need your second location to prove itself out, and you need to extract yourself from the day-to-day so that it doesn't all rely on you. And she did, and we just listed it a month ago. So she worked on it for 18 months. And before, we were trying to sell it for $2 million and weren't really getting bites. And that's why. And now we're getting 3. We've got 7 offers right at $3 million right now. And so in just 18 months of taking my advice, she was able to add more than $1.5 million of enterprise value to her business. And so it's by the end of this process, like, there's no question the value that we add.
What are some of the big items or, like customary items that sellers need to do to sell effectively?
Number one is having clean financial. A lot of business owners really hate accounting and they don't pay attention to it, or they're not focused on it. Maybe they've changed accountants because whatever reason, or bookkeepers. And a lot of times mistakes in accounting can ruin deals. And so, a good example, one that we just had, we listed this business, the trailing 12 months P&L said that it was just over $1 million in EBITDA, in profit. And we took that to market and we got a whole bunch of offers on it, and we got into escrow and we got into due diligence, and they hired a forensic accountant and found $130 of misallocated ownership draws. So they were classified to the balance sheet instead of the P&L. And the owner just made the mistake of putting it on the P&L. And so they overstated their income by $130,000. Oh, but stuff that ruins deals. And so if you go...
Why? Because the trust is gone? Why? Because the buyer would be like, I don't trust this person now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, buyers are so paranoid. Like, they always think they're getting duped. They always, everyone's question, like, why are you selling this business? It's making $1 million. Why wouldn't you keep it? They find out that there's a mistake in the accounting, and then it's just like red flags everywhere. And so, we're doing everything that we can to hold this one together. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but now that work is done, that forensic accounting, that's called a quality of earnings, we know what the real numbers are. And if we have to list it again, then we will, and the price will come down accordingly, but we'll get there. And so having your financials straight can really avoid this mistake and a whole bunch of headaches and stress.
What if, business has been going down slowly? Any possibility of selling it or no? Or if it goes down and then you're able to bring it back up, how long would a buyer want you to see it back up for in order to trust it'll be okay to buy?
Those are great questions. And it really depends on the situation, because there could be, if something's had a steady fall off and the owner has a reason for it, that's understandable. Like, I'll give you an example. I had one once where the seller, his wife was pregnant in the hospital a lot, like really sick, and his father-in-law fell and broke his back at the same time. And so he was doing everything he could to take care of the kid, take care of his pregnant wife who was sick in the hospital, and take care of his father-in-law who had a broken back. And you could see the numbers start to slide. And so when you look at something like that from a buyer, it's like the human part of you understands it. It's like, okay, I totally get that. You've been taken away from the business for the last 6 or 8 months. It's been a really hard time. I see that in the numbers. I have faith that I can come back and fix that. But if it's something that they can't associate with or put their finger on, and it's just scary looking, then it's bad. And it makes it really difficult to sell. And if you can sell it, you're going to be selling it, pennies on the dollar compared to the time before when things were still going.
Yeah, that's really tough. Well, let's say you're able to get things to come back, how long would you need to have of an upward trajectory for a buyer to feel like things are okay again?
I think probably to match whatever the dip was. So if the dip was, and most of the business, to be clear, like most of the businesses that I work with have monthly memberships. And so, there's a lot of consistency in the money that comes in. If you're talking about a construction company, their financials are totally different because they're spending millions of dollars on materials before they get paid, and so there's weird seasonality to that type of accounting. Whereas, most of the ones that I get to work with, if there's a drop off, if it's not because it's summertime or the holidays, there's a problem.
I know there's seasonality and things like that, but, would you say like 6 months trend back to health is enough, a year? Yeah, I know it depends on the situation, but, what in general, like you feel comfortable with, let's say, advising someone?
I would say if the numbers are back to where they were before the dip, so however long that takes. So if you're at $1 million and you dropped to 900,000 over the course of 3 years, but you get back to it in a couple months, I think people would be relieved by that. Mostly, I think people just want to see it get back to where it was.
Well, the reason I'm asking is I speak to a bunch of business owners, and last year and this year, for a lot of people, it seems really bad. Like a lot of people telling me they're down 30%, so like usually in online type stuff. But, how long would a business like that need to recover if it does?
I mean, it's hard to say, but I really do think, 6 months is better than 3, 9 months is better than 6, 12 is better than 9. the more months of improvement that you have, the more confident buyers are going to be. If you have 3 good months and then you want to get out because you're nervous about it going back down again, decent chance buyers are going to sense that, and take it out on you in the negotiations because they're paranoid again. So it's constantly, sellers are defensive and buyers are paranoid. And that's why they shouldn't work together. They're not the right people to take care of each other. I'm there to make sure everybody feels heard and that their concerns are spoken to. And then I do everything I can to take the emotion out of the deals and make them happen.
Right. It's good. I mean, how often do you see that sellers misrepresent their financials deliberately? Or is it just accidental because they don't pay attention?
Literally, maybe once or twice that I've ever seen that out of the 100 listings that I've done in the last 5 years where I really questioned it. What is a lot more common is that there's just an honest mistake. And tons it's because people are, a lot of people own small businesses so that they can use them as tax shelters to write off things. And that's part of the game. Like that's why we do it. But it's important for people to know that, ultimately someone being able to buy your business relies on your corporate tax returns showing the profit that you say the business has. So if you're advertising your business for sale and saying you've got $1 million in cash flow, but then you look at your tax return and it says 500,000, you're not going to be able to sell it at the $1 million valuation. You're going to have to sell it at the $500,000 valuation unless you can explain the difference and it makes sense.
Right. What about, it sounds like you're invested in a lot more than typical brokers. I've called a bunch. They just seem to be gruff and, sinus and just not approachable, not friendly. It doesn't seem like they're there to help people sell their business. It's weird.
It is the bunch of old crusty folk in this industry. I'm happy to not be one.
But why do you think that is? Or, what do you do if you have to interact with someone like that?
Pretty rare. Most of the time there's only one broker in a deal. And so, when I'm working with my client as the seller, it's rare that I have to work with other brokers. What happens sometimes is they'll reach out saying that they're representing a buyer. And in my experience, this has never worked. I have never successfully co-brokered a deal with anyone else. And most of the time it's because that broker is brand new. And that's why they're working with buyers, because it's not a great place to be. You can work with a buyer for years and years and they don't ever buy anything. When you're working with a seller, you actually have a business to sell. And if they want to sell it, you should be able to sell it.
And you said 80% don't sell? I know yours, but in general?
80% of businesses that get listed don't sell.
So why is that? What do you think is going on? Sure, you've seen a lot of listings.
So many. I'd say the biggest culprits are usually, number one, not using a good broker. Number two, having unrealistic expectations about the price. You can list the business yourself as a business owner, and a lot of people will just make up numbers and say, I need 10 million to retire, so I'm going to ask for $10 million. That's not how it works. But the other part is the process. The process itself is a grueling process. And, when you include a business that's got multiple locations and thus multiple landlords, and then you've got a buyer and a seller and their whole families, and then each side has an attorney, and then the lender has an attorney, and the landlords have attorneys. There's a lot of egos that can get in the way of deals. And so a lot of what I do is just trying to pacify, the attorneys who start fighting with each other. Because, so not to criticize attorneys, I love the good ones, but there are a lot of attorneys out there that will just keep billing hours for the sake of billing hours. And if they can fight with somebody and keep billing hours, they will. And so a lot of what I do too is bringing all of these different parties together to try and just keep everyone on track to get this deal done that's in everyone's best interest to get done.
What are common dispute points?
Oh man, everyone's afraid that the staff is going to leave. I think that's a huge concern. Buyers always want to talk to the staff before they buy the business. And sellers know that to happen. We do our best to keep that from happening. If anything, maybe a key employee right before the deal closes.
Yeah, what do you do? What do you do to ameliorate that?
It's tricky, but when you've got a negotiation that's a two-way negotiation, you can't include a third party that's not aware of the sale. And so, we can't have terms in there about an employee staying unless they're part of the conversation. And no seller wants to do that because then it triangulates the negotiation, because now their employee has outsized leverage in making this deal happen. And if the employee decided to use that leverage and threaten to leave, not only could they tank the deal, but they could actually really harm the business while it's in the process of selling and make it impossible to sell. And so for me, it's really just a no. Like we don't let buyers talk to the employees. It's an opening a can of worms that we don't want for the seller.
Well, what are you supposed to do? I mean, like, I'll give you a funny example. It's funny now. Years ago, I don't know, it was 15 years ago, I don't know what was wrong with me. I tried to buy a nail salon, and I bought it from the owners to this Vietnamese couple. The next day, every single person quit. And then they colluded with the past workers to like starve the business and drive away traffic and kill it. I should have sued them, but it wasn't that much money involved, but still. How do you avoid a nightmare?
Sorry. So sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it was crazy. I had a rental, and luckily my tenant was Vietnamese. And I said to her, "Can you run this place?" Because she said she knew other nail techs and all that. So we tried to keep it going, but it was just like death.
Well, okay, so a couple different things, but number one, I would say don't buy a business unless you want to, or at least willing to work in it. I think that's important. It's every time I'm selling somebody a Pilates studio and they don't know anything about the industry, I'm really wary of their ability to run the business. Like, how's the staff going to look up to you if you can't speak their language? And so, I've only had the step once, and it was because the buyer came in and literally pitted them across the room from each other and told them that he was going to fire half.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Gary Glenn Ross type.
Yeah, so that was the only situation that I've had similar to yours. Usually for me, employees all want to keep their jobs. They want to keep their payroll. Buyers want to keep the employees. They want that transition to be smooth, and clients want the employees to stay. And so as long as no one comes in and messes that up, that's usually what I do.
Assuming they're going to freak out, what should you do? Come in first day, be like, I bought the business. Don't worry. I'm not making any decisions on hiring, firing, any of that for at least 90 days. That's not even a question. I just want to get in here, learn you guys, talk to you guys, see how you guys are. You guys get to know me. Your job's not in danger. Please. I don't know. What would you say? What would be a good speech to? That's perfect. Oh, no.
Perfect way to start. And I wouldn't say the 90 days part. Like, there's no reason to give them a timer. Look, I bought this business because it's clearly very successful because of you. I only want to support you. A lot of times people come in and they do offer some sort of incentive like right away to key employees. So if there's a operations manager, general manager, someone who you feel like is really, really valuable that you don't want to lose, you can come in on day one and be like, look, if you stay for a year, I'll give you this much of a bonus. And that's how much it's worth to you to keep that person for a year so that you don't, have to replace them. But most of the businesses that I'm selling have deep benches and they have, a GM and an assistant GM and then a studio coordinator, a front desk person who's a lead, and then they have a lead trainer, a lead service provider. And, those opportunities to promote from within become huge. And so when you're looking to buy a business, you want to see that deep bench on the staff and know that if the upper people leave, that there are other people who are there ready to take on the reign.
Makes sense. Okay. Any other, I know we're now all day here and stuff, but maybe one or two other main impediments to a successful sale or something that causes the deal to really go awry.
Landlords are a special group of people. There's a reason the word Lord is in their title. They have so much power and so much control. And a lot of times in these deals, the way that people's leases are written, even after you sell the business, you have to remain a guarantor on the lease. Most leases are written.
Really?
And so in a weird way, on one hand, that actually gives the landlord an incentive to approve the deal because chances are now they're going from 2 guarantors to 4. However, landlords have their own agenda and it doesn't always line up with the businesses. And so, some of the crazier stories that I've had, I had one of the landlords once, the lease was coming up to an end. And so they had to negotiate an extension of the lease. And he raised the rent 60%, 60.
That's crazy.
And not in a city that you would think it was. It was in Nashville, which blew my mind. I had a landlord in Southern California demand 5% of equity in the business going forward to approve the assignment. assignment.
Malls have done that. I've seen that with mall kiosks.
And he got it.
So it's crazy.
So I've had landlords say no just because they don't like somebody. That's really painful because a lot of times you assume that there's some ism involved there because on paper it's like you've got a financially qualified buyer, you've got a viable business. Why would you say no to this? It's like, I just don't like them. I don't think they have the right experience.
It's amazing. Well, what if so there's a lease and there's like, I don't know, 5 years left on the lease. The landlord says, okay, you take it over. Are they still going to try to keep the old person on the hook? Or as long as they get a new person on the hook, they're okay?
No, they'll keep the old person on for the other 5 years if they can.
If they can, I mean, what leverage do you have against them?
Well, I mean, there's some landlords are human beings and understand this. And if the buyer is, well qualified and the business remains stable for a period after the transition, they might be willing to let the sellers off. So sometimes it's like, you have to remain a guarantor for a year to make sure that the buyer gets through this transition and is successful. So that's like a nicer middle ground than keeping them on indefinitely. Sometimes we can get them off as guarantors if we leave a couple of extra months of security deposit on file. And, sometimes there's landlords that try and we've got one, we've sold his business twice. And the landlord has 4 generations of owners as guarantors. And even when the lease gets extended by a new buyer, according to them, everyone is still liable from the original lease.
But that's ridiculous. Okay.
Yeah. I don't think a court would uphold that, but I'm not a lawyer. So
is it better to take over a lease that has, let's say, just a year left versus like 5 years left?
I think everybody needs to know exactly what kind of runway they have for security. Like you never want to buy a business that's only got a year left on it and then find out that you've got to move it and that's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So if you get an SBA loan to buy a business, the bank will insist that you have on a 10-year term in your lease to match the term of the loan so that you won't be homeless with the business while you owe the bank money.
And you sell a business like that.
So during the escrow process, when we go apply for lease assignment, we have to ask the landlord usually for an additional option to extend. And so most common, I would say, is people a 5-year term with a 5-year option. And so if they're a couple years into that, then we just have to go to the landlord and say, we need another option. And most of the time, the landlord is agreeable to that. They might want it to say at fair market value, which gives them, a lot of flexibility to still make the rent go up. Maybe in that circumstance, as the buyer, you say, that's fine as long as it's capped at 10% or something like that. So you're not going to get totally boned. But that's what we have to do. We have to get the landlord's blessing. And that's why they can be a huge impediment. They might, want to sell the building. That's another big one that we've had happen a bunch of times. Like you go to the landlord and apply for a lease assignment and they're like, oops, sorry, we're in escrow for the sale of the building. We can't talk about this for 90 days.
That's crazy.
And then you got to talk to the new landlord.
I see why all these things translate now back onto the seller's side. So if I want to sell my business at a bakery or whatever, and I have like a year and a half left on my lease, you're going to tell me, well, you better talk to the landlord because unless you resolve that, no one's going to be able to buy this or want to buy it.
Correct.
Okay, I see.
Sheesh. Yeah, scary. It's a really scary moment for people. And no seller wants people to know that they're selling. I think every seller wants to keep it confidential because they're afraid that it'll hurt their business. I've got kind of a different take on this. From my experience, the more people who know that you're interested in selling, preferably well in advance, the better the sale process goes because the best people to buy a business are the people who know you, who know your business, who know your industry, maybe who have worked with you, who trust you. Like trust is really hard to come by. And so, if you as a business owner trust someone that you think would do a good job with your business, maybe 2 or 3 years before you're really thinking about selling, just mention it to them. Be like, hey, I'm going to be looking to exit in a couple years and, retire and go hang out with Mitch in Spain. If you ever want to own this place, let me know. Like, I'd love to talk to you about that. And I call that planting seeds. That's all you have to do. Obviously, there's nothing for them to worry about. You're talking about some fake decision years in advance, but you plant that seed in their mind that they could be the owner one day. And most people take that to heart as a huge compliment and go home to their partner or spouse and they're like, babe, what would you think about, leaving corporate job and owning this business? And they need a year or two for the timing to be right for themselves. Maybe they need to save up some money first, or, maybe they need to get really frustrated with their boss and come home one day and be like, that's it. I've had enough. I'm calling Richard, and I'm going to tell him that I want to buy his company, and we'll see what that means. And you introduce him to me. And I say, yeah, here's the deal. Let me help you, teach you about this process and help you find lending. And then we try to leverage those internal candidates who, probably have the owner's heart versus the external candidates who tend to come with a little bit more money because they have to compete with internal candidate. And that's what the seller to say, okay, I want to sell it to the internal candidate, but I want the money from the external candidate. And I'm the one that makes that happen.
Okay. Well, there's a ton more I could ask you, but I don't want to keep going too long here. What's the best way for people interested in, buying or selling their business to reach out to you? Can you handle just California or just San Diego or whatever?
We cover the whole country. We even started talking to people in other countries. It's really crazy. I've had people call recently from Singapore, Switzerland, Ireland. There really is something about having an expertise in this industry and being able to talk to people in detail about the equipment, whatever. But my company is Boutique Fitness Broker. And so that's our website. That's our URL. All of our social media handles are at Boutique Fitness Broker. My email is mitch@boutiquefitnessbroker. Send me an email. I'm always happy to meet with anyone and share what I know in an effort to help them and earn their trust.
Oh, last thing I forgot to ask you. Is there such a thing as a buyer's broker, or is the broker only represent the seller?
It's usually just the seller. There are some brokers out there who represent buyers. I personally don't, for that reason I said before. It's too hard to spin your wheels and never find one.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, well, very good, Mitch. Well, thanks so much for coming in on the show. I really appreciate it.
This is my pleasure, Richard. Thank you so much for having me.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Thank you for listening to the Good Question Podcast. Please email support@thegoodquestionpodcast.com if you have any referrals to great guests for us to interview. Visit thegoodquestionpodcast.com to hear more interviews. And please help us spread the word by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to this podcast.